Hi, I'm Rochelle, and you're listening to Box F1 Pod. Today we're talking all about the Baku Grand Prix, which was beyond thrilling. Luckily, though, with this being our first episode back after the break and with the whole sprint nonsense, we have plenty to talk about. So let's dive straight into the digital warm-up. Lap 1, F1 break. So there was a lot of activity throughout the last 3 weeks. Everyone took vacations. Fernando was on a yacht. Alex and Lily went to Hawaii. They went to Oahu and then Big Island, which was literally my vacation last week in reverse. Everything Alex and Lily do makes me so excited. They post such dorky pictures. They make fun of each other in the comments and the captions. Love it. Favorite F1 couple. Also, George and Carmen did a lot of posh things like Easter in the British countryside, where they took a walk through a green field and then went to the little bubbling brook at the bottom, and then they went to Easter lunch at the local pub, but it was a fancy local pub, not a Weatherspoons. And they wore cardigans and wellies, and it was just everything you would imagine George Russell's Easter to be. And then also there were some people who vacationed differently. Max and Lando were literally gaming and streaming for 3 weeks straight. In an interview over this weekend, Max was asked about the success of his stream, and he said it was probably the glasses. But really, I think it was the fact that P, who is Penelope, Kelly Piquet's daughter, kept coming in to his streams, and their little interactions together were so wholesome. And really, I think that's what made his streams so engaging. Also, there was a lot of F1 presence at the Monte Carlo Masters, which is a tennis tournament in Monaco. Obviously, Charles was there wearing a very pleasant linen pastel suit. And he went with his BFF Pierre, who brought his girlfriend. Don't know why. So it was just the three of them in all the pictures, but Pierre was definitely literally just talking to Charles the entire time. There were so many pictures of them, it looked like they were gossiping to each other. Very cute. Charles's brothers were also there, Lorenzo and Arthur, and it was just a very posh little event. And then also Pierre's girlfriend. It's a bros trip plus girlfriend. And then we also found out later that Lando was there, since he now lives in Monaco, and I guess he took a break from streaming. But it was funny, he was asked about it on his stream if he hung out with Charles and Pierre, which is also my first question. And he was well, they were closer to the court, but in my opinion, they had worse seats because their necks kept having to turn this way and that way. Whereas I could see everything without turning my head. So they probably have neck pain right now, whereas I'm fine, which is a very Lando way to say I had cheaper seats. But that also could be because Charles is Monaco royalty at this point, so he could easily access better seats. And also, Toto Wolff was there, completely separate from all of them. I don't think they spoke at all, but Toto and his wife were there. Also, this is not a rumor, but it is a hilarious story. Apparently, according to Christian, him, Toto Wolff, and Fred Vasseur flew to the Australian Grand Prix together, but they were all, so Fred had dislocated a disc in his back or something, so he couldn't move. Christian was recovering from food poisoning, so he was dying, and Toto had just had eye surgery or something, so he also was struggling. And for some reason, this image to me is so hilarious of these three rich, powerful men on a private jet just dying in their respective corners. And finally, the one person I forgot to mention, Lewis, who, unlike Max and Lando, had a very versatile spring break. He went on a little family vacation, then he went to Coachella, which honestly, Lewis and his fits thrive at Coachella. Even though they're very similar to his paddock fits, they just fit in the Coachella setting. Okay, imagine a Coachella fit, but everyone else is wearing Puma. It's jarring, isn't it? So anyway, I love him there. I love when he goes to all these celebrity events because it really he fits in. He looks so cool and effortless there. And another thing that was really wholesome with Lewis is that he went to support his brother Nicholas Hamilton at his motorsport race. And it's so sweet to hear Lewis talk about his brother because he's clearly super, super proud. His brother has a disability, which means his car has to be designed specially for him so he can use it properly. And it's been like a hard road for him to find sponsors and find a means to actually race. So it's really cool that he was able to finish 7th and do so well, and that Lewis was able to support him. You have to find that interview of Lewis talking about it, though. It's like it's very sweet. But I do love that Lewis went undercover so that the attention wouldn't be taken away from his brother in the race. Although I'm not sure how successful his disguise was because several people like posted like pap like shots of Lewis watching the race at a corner, and like he wore all black and like these red wellies, and obviously like I don't think anyone else is dressing like that at this random track. It's like clearly all designer clothes. But I love that he wore black because he thought that would help. Anyway, the thought of the disguise was very cute. Whether it was successful or not, I'm not sure, but it was very cute. Okay, lap 2. Charles is an artiste. So, continuing on with the theme of the break, during his time off, Charles actually wrote and released music. It's a piece he composed on the piano called Oz 23, and then in parentheses 1-1. And it's this beautiful, melancholy, tragic piece of music. But beautiful. And it was released in Europe and then eventually on Spotify in the States as well. And not only that, but Charles actually went number 6 worldwide. And I saw a comment on one of the Instagram posts about it saying he's higher on the music charts than in the World Championship. Which, not anymore, sir. He is now 6th in the World Championship too. So, who's laughing now? Also, hilarious quote from Charles when he was asked if he would collaborate with Lewis. He said, "I think Lewis is singing, but I don't know what type of song he is singing. If he's happy to sing in a depression song, then I might be the one he goes to. My songs are not the happiest ones, but maybe one day, why not? There will be something that would be very funny to see." That is very sad, Charles. Hopefully you have some happier memories to compose about, but to be honest, Lewis's racing life isn't doing so hot either, so he might be very down to collab on a sad boy song. Anyways, yay for Charles. I love that this artistic side of him is showing. In Australia, we found out he had a secret photography account on Instagram. Now he's like an international music artist. Great stuff from Charles. Also, sorry, side note, he learned to play the piano during the pandemic. So he not only learned to play the piano like 3 years ago, he also learned to compose. That's like, you can't really teach that. He self-taught himself. You have to have a natural talent for it. It's not fair when someone looks like that and has so much raw natural talent, is it? Anyway, love Charles. Lap 3, Baku. So there were some random Baku moments that I wanted to talk about, but they didn't really fit into their own category. So it's just a hodgepodge. First, Oscar was super, super sick all weekend. He lost like 3 kilos, which is, I think, about 6 pounds from a stomach bug. And honestly, he usually looks like a little bit peaky, but this weekend he was like peaky. I cannot believe they're allowed to race in like conditions like that. But it is very impressive that he was even able to get in the car, let alone make it through a sprint weekend. So kudos to him. And it was very sweet. He did thank his doctor when he crossed the finish line for all his help. So also, speaking of McLaren, Lando is in that stage of his 20s where he's realized that his face can grow like 4 hairs, and he's decided that that's equivalent to like an actual beard. So he's like got something real interesting happening on his face. George joked that he was going to gift him a razor before Miami, and honestly, I think that's best, but also Lando's not ready for the razor because he thinks it looks great. So we're going to have to look at these scraggly, like, 4 hairs for a while, I think. Also, speaking of people who probably could actually grow beards, Dr. Helmut Marko turned 80, which is old. That's old. Should he still be there making it? Honestly, impressive that he can. He clearly can make decisions, even if they're low-key evil. So it's impressive that at 80, his mind is still so sharp. Christian, speaking of Red Bull, told the press that another F1 team contacted Red Bull sponsors to suggest that the cost cap breach would bring disrepute to the brands. And when he was asked who, he said, "I'll let your imagination run away with you." Always stirring the pot. That's our Christian. But I think it's pretty obvious it was Zach. Like, I know a lot of people's mind will jump to Toto, because that's an easy guess since they're like long-standing rivals. But that's not really Toto's vibe. Considering everything Zach did last year, the open letter, all that stuff with Daniel, the way he acted on DTS, I think it's pretty clear that this is like his brand of pettiness. Anyway, I love when Christian drops these subtle hints. So, lap 4. The best lap I have ever done in my life. Fernando and Taylor Swift. So, honestly, the juiciest thing to ever hit the F1 news cycle. Somehow, some way, over break, a rumor was started that Fernando Alonso is dating Taylor Swift. I think it originated from some Spanish tabloid. I don't know, but this rumor, which is blatantly false, because just like from a logistics perspective, I don't know when it would have happened. Anyway, this rumor took on a life of its own, and I really think this is a testament to the power of F1 fangirls, because we all know that it was them that gave this rumor power and made it the cultural phenomena that it is right now. And honestly, that was a compliment. That was like the biggest possible compliment I could pay anyone. I'm obsessed with all of it, and I could not go anywhere without seeing Fernando and Taylor Swift content. And on the greatest thing to come out, there was like all the internet chatter and all the memes and all the jokes, and that was great. But the best thing that happened was at the beginning of this race week, Fernando posted a TikTok, which by the way is his jam now. He's a TikToker. But the video was him in a chair, like on his phone, and then he looks up, winks at the camera, and then like looks back down. The caption is "Race Week Era, Winky Face," and the song is "Karma" by Taylor Swift. And then it doesn't end there. He commented on his own video, "Feeling 33," and another winky face. Like, I know Europeans love their winky faces, but like, dude. Also, to help you gauge the level of my excitement, this entire outline section is like in all caps. I'm very excited. Not only that this rumor exists, but that Fernando would fuel it in this way. So anyway, over the race weekend, Will Buxton, unable to resist, asked Fernando point blank, "I have to ask this because otherwise I'll just be leaving a blank space. I know this is your love story and no one else's, but there's obviously been rumors." And Fernando is smiling this entire time, like looking back and forward to his comms person. And as soon as Will started with the "but," Fernando interrupts, laughs, and says, "Oh, no, nothing to say, mate. I answered this already." And Will was like, "You answered this already? I just saw you wink at the camera." And Fernando says, "I have nothing to say." And Will says, "That's not an answer." And Fernando says, "It is so complicated, this Baku weekend. I'm sure you have a lot of questions about that." Way to deflect. I just love that he like fans the flames and then refuses to answer any questions, but is like so clearly so giddy about it. He's like loving all of this. He's gonna milk it for all it is worth. Also because like, what can he actually answer? "No, I'm not dating Taylor Swift." This is way more fun. And also, just because Fernando is dodging questions and not outwardly answering anything doesn't mean that the rest of us have been able to dodge Taylor Swift references. The commentators really had a field day this entire weekend. So here are some of the best references. And after a fortnight of Taylor Swift dating rumors, our fearless anti-hero Fernando Alonso's happiness will be confirmed if he can take third place from sixth on the grid for the record of most consecutive finishes in a single place other than first. "'Tis the damn season," as she says, Taylor Swift. For the man to end his previous year's podium exile, is he aware he could equal the record? Well, I think he knows, Simon. No champagne problems with Fernando this year. Very good. Then, swift drive from Fernando Alonso. And Fernando Alonso has just gone fourth fastest, like he's driving a getaway car. And then, so maybe that might cause some bad blood. And Fernando found a bit of blank space there up ahead of him, and he can easily say it's a car issue. Don't blame me. And this is Fernando Alonso style. And maybe at the end they'll say, woulda, coulda, shoulda. And then I asked Taylor Swift. She said he was the mastermind. And then Yuki, number 22, which is not Alonso's favorite number, but you know, a swift check of the facts, and it might well be. Honestly, I'm just impressed that these middle-aged men took the time to research Taylor Swift songs, clearly spent a while writing down potential references that they could say during the race. A for effort, truly. Anyway, this is like one of my favorite rumors of all time, and it couldn't have happened to a more deserving soul. Fernando will play into it like no one else would have. I hope it never, ever dies. All right, lap 4, paddock fits. Okay, so I took a poll after Melbourne and was like, do you guys think that this full grid fashion frenzy will continue to Baku or stay in Melbourne? And it was overwhelmingly stay in Melbourne, and that would be correct. Lewis and Guan Yu are the only ones that bothered yet again. So Lewis had an outfit for every day, and they all kind of tend to be like in the similar vein, like super baggy, bulky jacket and pants sets. Sometimes he'll throw on like a little knitted cardigan thing with no shirt on underneath, obviously. But one of my absolute favorites from this weekend was this set from Louis Vuitton that was like a beige, black, gray camo thing, but there was like actually an abstract face on the jacket. It was very cool. And then Guan Yu. Oh, Guan Yu. He's wearing black pants, Rick Owen sneakers that are like in the style of like Converse high tops, and this silver metallic-y jacket that's actually Lululemon. So very approachable. I guess he was doing brand work because he represents them, but he looked so effortlessly cool, like yet again. A bit like one of those like natural disaster blankets, you know, the foil ones that you wrap yourself in after an earthquake or something, but still very cool. But also the big fashion question at the moment, heading into the next week, is will Lewis attend the Met Gala? New York City is en route to Miami from Baku, so fingers crossed that Lewis makes a quick Met Gala pit stop. Anyway, with that, we conclude our digital warm-up. On to the race rhyme, which, by the way, plays homage to my favorite rumor of the season. So see if you can spot all of those references. Finally, the F1 break has come to an end. We're racing on Baku streets again. Let's hope everyone is ready to go full send. Maybe we'll get a Charles pole again? It's a sprint weekend and there's a new format on trial. We qualify for Sunday, Friday, qualify for Saturday, Saturday, sprint on Saturday, and race on Sunday. It's so confusing. I'm pretty sure it's going to go out of style. Starting on Friday, Pierre's car is burning red and smoky for days. Also, there are 2 red flags, which lately, red flags seem to be all the rage. And Charles gets pole, which brings him one step closer to some champagne sprays. Also, Charles just keeps pointing to the Ferrari logo like he was in a lavender haze. On Saturday, Karma is a cat, taking Charles P1 just like that. Down the track, Yuki's tire spins, and then Checo takes the sprint win. But do you really want to know where I was April 29th? Rewatching clips of the George and Max drama, mesmerized. When the lights went out on Sunday, Charles was driving the getaway car. He was flying, but he never got far. Max and Checo overtaking was a guarantee, but then a car is in the wall, and it's Nick DeVries. Now we are riding in the safety car. But Max pits right before, which is basically like fate saying, don't stress, he'll be P2 and you'll be P1. It's a Baku story. Checo, just say yes. Meanwhile, Fernando and Lance laid the groundwork for their friendship to work. And when Fernando feeds Lance the brake tip over the line, and Lance has a brake issue, is Fernando a mastermind? In the last lap, Ocon pits for the very first time. Luckily, the photographers get out of the way or they'd be human slime. The FIA really should not be left to their own devices, especially in an F1 crisis. So Red Bull is on a podium, it's a typical Sunday night, and Christian and Dr. Marco feel nothing but delight. But Charles is like, why can't you see? P1 belongs to me. Let's believe he'll get bejeweled when we're in Miami going vroom vroom. His win will make his whole face and the whole place shimmer. That's it for Baku. Miami is in a week, even if it feels like 22. Okay, on to analysis. So I'm going to do this slightly out of order because I think it's just random to talk about qualifying, then talk about the results of something that doesn't actually affect the race, and then have to re-remember the qualifying results to talk about the race. So for the sake of clarity, something that the FAA clearly doesn't value very much, I'm going to start with the sprint and then chat about quali before diving into the race. So before we dig into what happened on Saturday, I want to quickly go over the new sprint weekend format and some of the reactions to it. So even though it's already happened, I feel like it's still kind of confusing, like less so the actual logistics, which we've obviously lived through now, so we get, but more so like why. It was the first sprint weekend of 2023, and Stefano Domenicali decided to shake things up. I think he left it open-ended so that things might change again before the next sprint race, but as of Baku, the sprint weekend format is as follows. Friday, free practice 1, followed by traditional qualifying, and this qualifying session will set the grid for Sunday's race. On Saturday, forget everything that happened on Friday. The morning kicks off with a sprint shootout. The sprint shootout is the qualifying session specifically for the sprint race, but it's like a mini version of qualifying. So SQ1 is 12 minutes, SQ2 is 10 minutes, and SQ3 is 8 minutes, which is about half the time of regular qualifying. And the results will set the grid for the sprint race, followed by the actual sprint later that afternoon, which is around 30 minutes and usually like 17 laps or so, I think. The point system here is the same as before, so P1 gets 8 points, and each position after gets 1 point less until P8, which earns 1 point. And then on Sunday, traditional race ensues, which will follow the qualifying results from Friday. Saturday results play no part in Sunday's race, except in terms of penalties. So penalties from FP1, traditional qualifying, and the sprint race will apply to Sunday's race. Any penalties incurred from the sprint shootout will apply to the sprint race only. Park firm breach penalties will result in a pit lane start for the sprint and the race. It's not entirely clear if it's like if you do a park firm breach, if you're punished for both events, or if it depends on when that breach happens. And also, power unit penalties apply to the race only. So F1 says that this updated format is better for, one, entertainment value, but it will also give more incentive for drivers to push hard during sprint races, since incidents won't compromise their starting position for the Grand Prix. Which is like a weird take for me. Like, surely it's the opposite. They have like way less reason to care. And as we saw, it doesn't really give much of an opportunity to midfield teams to score more points, which was like the other argument, since like at least on Saturday, the only non-top team driver to get points was Alex. To me personally, it all just seems very random. It feels like it's forcing like the equivalent of like a friendly or like an exhibition match in football, but it's like shoved in the middle of a race weekend. And also it's just like a really abrupt change of pace. Like we set the grid for Sunday on Friday, and then we just do a completely unrelated activity on Saturday. I like that the weekend used to like build on itself leading up to like the grand finale, which was the Grand Prix. So speaking strictly in terms of logical order, I think it would make more sense to hold the sprint on Friday and then Saturday do like qualifying and whatnot. But I guess then that eliminates the chance for like a free practice. I don't know the appropriate solution, but I don't think we're there quite yet. Like a sprint would even make more sense during a break, like in the middle, like people are bored out of their minds waiting for F1 to return. And this is like a fun, like nugget to throw people because it doesn't actually matter, right? And then there's more time there's no like pressure on the engineers and the teams to like fix a car in 4 hours. Which again brings me to like the other thing, like logistics and entertainment aside, it's really hard for the teams. Like even if there's like an incident in the sprint shootout, that gives them like 4 hours to fix the car for the sprint race. And then since it's like basically a mini race, the damage that could come from a sprint is far more intense than qualifying, which would also put more pressure and more stress on the teams and the engineers and the mechanics to make these major fixes. Also, it's probably really expensive. Like, if you crash twice, if you crash in the sprint and the race, that's double the money to fix the car. And there's like a cost cap, no? Like, is it fair for F1 to force them to spend more money when they're like also monitoring the amount of money they're spending? Seems weird. There also ended up being like a huge issue with soft tire regulations, which I'll get into when I actually talk about the sprint. But basically the format and the regulations aren't really set up to support the teams in a way that makes all of this worth it from my perspective. The only thing that the teams noted as a positive is that it's an opportunity for data collection, so they can like make improvements for future races. Is it worth it? Oh, I don't know. They don't. That seems like they were fishing for a reason to give for why this is like fine. You know, like it didn't feel like, yeah, this is great. We're so excited about this. They're like, well, if we're doing this, I guess we can get some data. But there was a lot of conversation amongst the drivers and the team principals regarding the new sprint format. So I'm just going to run through some of the comments against it, because the positive comments aren't actually positive. They're just like neutral. It doesn't really seem like anyone on the grid is particularly excited about this, to be honest, but some are more vocal about it being bad than others. So Christian Horner had made some comments about not liking the sprint format, and they were taken out of context a bit, I guess, because he was re-asked why he and Max are the only ones opposing the sprint race. And he said, "What I said is it is completely mad to be doing a sprint race here at this circuit, probably one of the most dangerous on the calendar from a team's point of view, because the jeopardy, the damage that potentially is there with another street race, Miami next weekend. But from a fan's point of view and from an action point of view, I mean, it's going to be flat out racing all weekend here. So I think that's going to be plenty of action, and it's going to be about trying to navigate your way through it as seamlessly as you can." Which Christian is basically making the same point I did, which it makes no sense for the team or the drivers. It's like, oh, I guess it's entertaining. Okay, so other people that are against it. Max has been like vehemently against this for a while. But at the post-sprint conference this weekend, they were asked about it again. Charles and Checo were far more diplomatic in their opinions of it, though really they were saying the same thing. Charles said he prefers this format to last year's format, but would like it to only be like 2-3 races. And Checo and Charles both think that the soft tire rule needs to be adjusted. Max said that it creates artificial excitement and thinks we should scrap the whole thing, which like I get what he means. And like a lot of people have been saying that Max is only saying this because he didn't win the sprint, but Max has been very vocally against this like forever. The last 2 race weekends, he's gone so far as to say he's not sure how long he'll stick around if this is going to be the new format. Plus he's won plenty of sprints, but he still doesn't like it. Like I don't think him losing is what's him being like, boo, no, this sucks. That's not what he's saying. He's like very clear that he's into the purity of the sport and that he likes the way the format built up to the GP race before. And that this just seems random and pandering to make more money. Now, okay, so Eddie Jordan made a similar point on his podcast with David Coulthard. And if you don't know, both Eddie Jordan and David Coulthard are F1 legends. Eddie Jordan owned and founded the Jordan F1 team, and Coulthard was a pretty successful former F1 driver. So they're talking about the new format, and Eddie Jordan is so against it. He says, "It's confusing. I'll ask you a question. One word. Why? For what reason?" And David responds, "Entertainment." And then Eddie says, "But what we're doing is giving the game away because they want more starts, because they think there's more excitement and more crashes at the beginning." David, it's wrong. You know it's wrong. It's a farce. For me, it's a little bit scary that we're looking for a quick fix. We're just looking for excitement, excitement, excitement. And I think you know the purity of the racing needs to also be considered, which I think is fair enough. It is trying a bit hard. This was my favorite quote about it from Carlos. It's kind of neutral, but like I think the way he responded makes it clear that he's not wild about this idea. Maybe not as aggressively opposed as others that we just went through, but his clear confusion proves the point for itself. So during the driver's press conference on Thursday, Carlos was asked, "How different will your approach be to Saturday now?" And Carlos goes, "Saturday? What will be on Saturday?" And then he does like a sheepish chuckle. "Oh, shootout quali? That will be difficult, especially, waking up in the morning, going to Q1. I'll have to do a cold shower just to make sure I'm really ready to push flat out first thing in the morning. I will make sure to do my morning routine well because it'll be intense. And then, well, the sprint quali, oh, it's sprint. Yeah, it's exciting. Obviously, tougher both mentally and physically for us, but it makes the fans happy and the media happy and makes the product better. Then I guess we'll do it." And everyone around him is just like laughing. Because he sounds so like lost, but also like I think they all agree. They're like, this is dumb. In conclusion, basically, meh. I'm personally not wild about it. Clearly the drivers aren't either. But that being said, for this particular race, the majority of the action was during the sprint. Although even saying action during the sprint is a generous assessment. That's just how boring the race was. Okay, we'll get into that in a second. Let's talk about what actually went down on Saturday. So the sprint shootout, the biggest thing that happened during it was that we were immediately faced with the regulation issue, and that is the soft tire rule I mentioned earlier. So according to Sky Sports, with each driver only having access to 4 sets of medium tires and 6 soft compound tires, along with 2 sets of hard tires across the weekend, the new rules failed to prohibit them from using them up before Saturday's sprint shootout. The relevant article in this rule reads, in this period, SQ3 of the sprint shootout, up to 1 set of dry weather tires may be used, and this must only be a new set of the soft specifications. Teams noted that the use of the word may rather than must, and viewed this as an opportunity to use their tires as they pleased on Friday. Basically, in the sprint shootout, teams are required to use mediums for SQ1 and SQ2, but if you reach SQ3, you have to switch to a set of fresh, soft tires. That's how I'm understanding it. Teams who feel like they probably won't reach Q3 on Saturday are more likely to use more soft tires during qualifying the previous day. And this happened to both Yuki and Lando. Unfortunately for Lando, he did reach SQ3 on Saturday, which means he had to sit it out because he didn't have a set of fresh tires, which is dumb. As for Yuki, he got caught up in a kerfuffle during SQ1 when Logan Sargent crashed with like 25 seconds to go in the session, which brought out the red flag and brought the session to an end. So Yuki's shootout was ended, but through no fault of his own. By SQ3, though, Charles was holding on to the provisional pole position, but he ended up in the wall, which brought out the yellow flag. Charles was able to reverse back onto track, and luckily, somehow, no one beat his time, so he was able to keep pole position for the sprint race. No one actually got screwed by the yellow flag, except Carlos, who got held up because of it. So there's no telling where he would have finished otherwise, but given how his weekend was going, it's unlikely it would have been higher. Also, for the ceremony, I guess Pirelli wasn't about to waste another like mini tire on a sprint shootout, so they couldn't even waste like an extra pair of soft tires, let alone a mini tire. Very conservative, Pirelli. So they opted for like a paint splotched Pirelli hat, which Charles was like clearly not into. He was very reluctant to put it on. It was presented to him and he was looking at it so confused, like, why is this man giving me a hat? He popped it on for literally half a second for a picture and immediately took it off. And the camera just zooms in to where he tossed it to the side and stays there. So anyway, the results of the sprint shootout, and therefore the starting grid for the sprint race, was Charles in first, followed by Checo, Max, George, Carlos, Lewis, Alex, Alonso, Stroll, and Lando. All right, on to the sprint. So there were 3 major events that happened during the sprint that I really want to discuss. First, Yuki's tire. So the way this happened was kind of hilarious, but it's like lap 2, and then all we see is just like this lone tire slowly rolling down the hill, and everyone is trying to figure out who this tire belongs to. And then we see poor Yuki's like AlphaTauri like trudging along back to the pits with 3 tires and like a damaged front wing, which obviously issues a yellow flag and then a safety car. Yuki lost the tire because he actually had contact with Nick, which I don't think they actually showed on the broadcast, but in the post-race interview, Yuki was discussing it, and he's clearly so sad, and when he's talking about it, he just keeps saying some guy hit him. I don't know if he was upset like at Nick, so he kept saying some guy, or if he was trying to be respectful and nice, so he didn't want to name him, so he was just like, this guy hit me, like came out of nowhere. But we just saw his tire rolling, and then like he also lost the front wing, and that's all we saw. So I'm really glad that they thought that the lone tire rolling down the track was sufficient enough context for us to figure out what happened. Anyways, the wildest part was that Yuki came in to get a new tire and his front wing fixed, and then they sent him back out when the car was clearly like not in a good place. Everyone was like, why is he still here? He needs to go home. But he gave up pretty quickly and retired before the safety car was over. So poor Yuki, he is not having a great weekend, and really none of it is his fault. But that lone tire is going to live in my memory forever. All right. The next thing I want to talk about is Charles and Checo. So Charles did the best he could to lead the race, but Checo overtook him by like lap 8. But Charles was able to keep Max at bay for the rest of the race and finish P2. The craziest thing that happened in regards to Charles during the sprint is that he came onto the radio and said, there's a cut, and everyone was like, his engine's dying or something. But turns out he was saying cat. There was a cat on track. No one else seemed to have seen it. It was during the safety car. It ran past Charles's car. The worst part, and I kid you not, is that it was a black cat. A black cat crossed Charles's path. Will the Monegasque curse not let this boy live? Like, I do have a sub-theory that the black cat crossing actually reversed the curse, or initiated the curse reverse. Perhaps like we will start to see Charles experience a bit more luck in the upcoming weeks, because this week was definitely better, and we can say it was the cat, but there's room for improvement. He will be in P1 again, I guarantee it. But anyway, fingers crossed that the black cat didn't just like curse him further. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about, which was honestly the best drama to come from the sprint, and honestly the entire weekend, was Max and George. So like in turn 2, lap 1, George attempts to overtake Max down the inside, but he walks up because his tires haven't warmed up enough yet, and he taps Max. Technically, Max is ahead and it's his corner, and Max has left enough space. It's tight, but there's definitely enough for George to continue going forward without driving into Max. But because George attempted to like lodge himself between Max and this corner, while driving on cold tires, he walks up, understeers, and basically doesn't have enough control to keep his car from tapping into Max. Now, this is pretty divisive for some reason, but basically the argument for George is that it's aggressive, but still fair racing, and that there was plenty of space for Max. The argument for Max is that it was Max's corner, and George attempted a dangerous move down the inside on cold tires when there wasn't enough space to overtake. And he caused damage to Max. We've seen moves like this get penalized before, so it's weird that once again, I guess it's not weird actually, that the FIA is not being consistent. It's a gray area as to whether it's a racing incident or a reckless driving, I suppose, which is why it's causing divisiveness amongst fans. So Max was able to retain the position, but George still overtook him a few corners later, again by practically pushing him into the wall. This one was harder for Max to fight off since I guess he already had damage. But after the restart, Max was able to fight back and retain P3, but he was still driving the entire time with damage. And speaking of the damage, I don't think any of us saw it until the sprint was over, but there was literally like a giant gaping hole in Max's side pod. So the damage was aggressive. And my favorite meme of this gaping hole is someone photoshopped George doing his intro stance where he has his arms out and it looks like he's pushing the hole aside from inside the car. It was funny. Anyway, the damage was aggressive and it kind of makes Max's P3 more impressive, but to me it also sort of justifies his frustration, and he was frustrated. So let's talk that through. Because Max's comments during the race, and better yet, both his and George's responses after the race, were really, really something. So when it first happened, Max got on the radio and said, "He touched me," and his engineer says, "Just remember, he's got nothing to lose." Later, his engineer goes, "We've got some damage." And Max goes, "How?" And the engineer goes, "How do you think?" And Max goes, "I don't understand how he can keep the position if he's damaging my car. It's kind of ridiculous." Which, like, fair. And I don't know why the camera, because everyone was like, Max needs to calm down, but the camera wasn't picking up the giant hole in his car, and Max could clearly feel it, that something was off. So I think people were being like, stop being so dramatic, not knowing that his side pod was destroyed. And so then when Max overtakes George back, his engineer gets on the radio and says, "Lovely job, Max, and without contact as well." And Max goes, "Yeah, I know how to do that." Max's sass just sends me every time. But it got even spicier after the sprint race. So when they're like in the front where all of the like under the podium in the front where all of the post-race interviews take place, George is walking by walking by, and I think Max intercepts him. But there's like this incredible screenshot going around of like Checo and Charles hugging in the foreground of the image. And then in the behind them is Max with his helmet off in a heated exchange with George, whose helmet is on. Their arms are like waving while George is like taking his gloves off, which makes it look like he's like taking his gloves off to punch him, even though that's not what's happening. But like the still of that photo is hilarious. So the actual exchange though, like some people were saying that George came over to apologize, but that's not what happens. Max clearly intercepts George as George is walking by. And we see them argue, and like the audio picks up in the middle of the conversation. Max says, "You just drove straight into my side pods." And George says, "It wasn't on purpose, mate. I had no grip. I was locking up." Max chuckles and says, "Oh, mate, we all have no grip. We all need to leave a bit of space." And George is very huffy and like storms off and goes, "Watch the onboard," which pisses Max off even more. And he says, "Yeah, okay, well, next time you can expect the same." And then mutters under his breath, "Dickhead," which is all picked up on audio. Max gives his post-sprint interview right after, so he's still clearly like riled and heated. And the interviewer was like, the interviewer was like, "So is it sorted?" And Max goes, "It's not clarified. I just don't understand why you need to take so much risk in lap 1. Understeering into my side pod, creating a hole. We've all got cold tires. It's all easy for us to lock up." And his beautiful way of explaining it, like, "Oh, mate, I locked up. Oh, look at the onboard." It just doesn't make sense. And I can get that. Max, the Dutchman, is like, "I don't like this flowery bullshit." And George definitely uses flowery language, and like, also Max doesn't like excuses, I don't think. He's just like, just say sorry, bro, or like all the excuses I think really piss Max off even more. He was he was so out of sorts after that interview though that he literally like wandered around in the background as Charles was preparing for his interview. So you just see him walking back and forth behind the camera shot. And then he sees like some awkward man just like standing in his way, like gingerly holding out the P3 trophy, or it was like a little plaque. And the man looks terrified to like come up to Max, and Max goes, "What's that?" And he's like, just like hands it to him. I don't think he even says anything. Max like, "Oh, cool, thanks." And then like he wanders a bit more holding this little plaque thing and then just goes somewhere. He just looks so lost. He later said, "I don't like when somebody just has that kind of reaction, like I didn't do anything wrong," and just walks off. And then in the press conference, he got a bit sassier and said, "I guess it's hard not to hit a Red Bull car for them." And in the media pen later on, this one was the worst. Max told Dutch media that "you can also attack me without driving into my car. Oh, defending on the outside is not allowed because Princess George is sitting there." I really hope there's like tiara memes with George. Wait, Max. I can't say George handled it much better either, but like I think the worst part is that George was literally dumbfounded that this was an issue. This quote literally is insane. So George says, "I thought he was coming over to me to shake my hand and say nice battle, but clearly he was a little more angry than I expected. From my side, I was down the inside. I was ahead of the apex, and I was really quite surprised he was trying to hold the position. You know, it's lap 1, a sprint race on a street circuit, cold tires. You know, he knows the risks in that position. There was no intention to try and make contact, but he put me in a bit of a difficult position, and you know, ultimately, it was a very high risk for the both of us. Nothing more really to say. If you're overtaking on the inside, it's your corner. Max knows this. If you overtake on the outside, there's a risk. As I said, I was very surprised he was resisting. His position was already lost. He should have conceded the position, but he took a big risk. He was very fortunate not to get a puncture. I tried giving him as much room as possible, but on a start like this, it's challenging. I'm here to fight, I'm here to win, and I'm not just going to wave him past because he's Max Verstappen." So Hearing George say all this confuses me because, first of all, Max wasn't overtaking on the outside. He was ahead. And then George was overtaking in the inside. If you're overtaking on the inside, that doesn't mean the person next to you is overtaking on the outside. Max can't overtake if he's ahead. Also, the list George says about why Max is wrong is really, I'm pretty sure, the list of why he's wrong. Like, lap 1, sprint race, street circuit, cold tires. You were taking that risk, not Max. Also, that last comment, I'm not going to wave him past because he's Max Verstappen. I don't think Max thinks he should not be fought against because he's Max Verstappen. I think he thinks people should not put holes in his side pod. Both George and Max think the other person was taking too much risk. Shockingly, the Sky pundits are on George's side. The commentators were like, oh, yeah, that's a big hole, but also, like, calm down, Max. Will Buxton said, it's a bit rich, Max Verstappen saying a driver is taking some unnecessary risks. Max had made a career out of getting his elbows out, getting down and dirty. He's fought drivers hard his entire career, but he doesn't like being raced hard himself. Okay, but, like, George was wrong. And just because Max was a petulant 17-year-old doesn't mean he's still a petulant 17-year-old. You know? And then the one that got me the most was that Karun tweeted that George is a fair racer, which literally made me laugh out loud. I'm pretty sure George is responsible for like half of the first lap incidents last year. He like took out half the grid in 2022 in the first lap. Like, we all know it. Saying he's really fair and calm is like kind of weird because there's a plethora of evidence that says otherwise. And honestly, like, whether or not Max overreacted, which he did, saying he should chill out when there's a hole in his car and George was like, oh, good battle. Who would be calm after that? That's like annoying. Like, the situation is annoying. Max was way too dramatic. He went on about it for way too long. But honestly, I think it's fair enough that Max was annoyed that George took an unnecessary risk, put a hole in his car, and then didn't apologize. And instead was like, you're not congratulating me. Like, I think it's pretty self-explanatory why Max is annoyed. As for the drivers, only a couple spoke about it. Fernando said he understood why Max was annoyed and that there should be more consistent regulation for these incidents, as in the FIA should have probably penalized George for doing that, as they've done to people in the past. Lando made a joke about it with George and quoted Max saying, oh, he might do the same to you today. But then he said he was also on George's side. In conclusion, though, I do think George was wrong, but also Max reacted for like way too long. Like, I don't think the emotions were an overreaction. I think they were justified, but I think it dragged out for way too long. And then George just got stubborn. In conclusion, again, it was just a lot of drama that was exciting to watch, but they both were just like OTT. Okay, so now that we've thoroughly discussed that drama, although I don't think I'll ever be over it, we are going to rewind for a second back to Friday and talk about qualifying. Okay, just quickly going to note about free practice 1 was that Pierre had a technical issue and his car was just like literally on fire. Like giant plumes of smoke were wafting from it for ages. His engineers literally had like a few hours to fix it because qualifying was the same day. And apparently Esteban's engineers joined in to make sure the car was ready for the qualifying session. So Q1 was literally the longest Q1 in history because there were 2 red flags. First, Nick crashes into the wall nose first, and then like half a lap into the session restart, Pierre hits the wall, but like more gently than Nick. But he was able to drive it off track, but the bottom is like low-key flaming and there's still debris everywhere, so it issued another red flag. The shot of the Alpine engineers just looking appalled at the state of their life. They're like, are you kidding? We just fixed that. Again. And Pierre's little I'm sorry on the radio was just made me want to tear up. Like, poor guy. But also very weird. His like, you know how when they go back there, they're like walk back, or sometimes they get into the car, or sometimes they get like on a moped behind some volunteer. But like the medical guy was like shoving Pierre into the back seat of the medical car, and it like in a very aggressive way. Like, it looked like he was being arrested. It was very bizarre. It looked like they were, like, arguing, and then he, like, shoved him into the back. Very odd. Anyway, the red flags were, like, one after the other. They made everyone very antsy, and they were literally just all lined up waiting to get back in to qualifying. Another thing that was a big issue was the sun was very bright and everyone kept complaining about it. They just like played like 5 radios in a row about people being like, the sun is bright. Charles asked for a darker visor and they're like, we don't have any. They were driving with like the sun directly in their eyes. Like, that's hard. It's hard to do for like regular people. But also, this is not important to the race like at all, but to me there's nothing funnier than like a very European man giving instructions to Logan Sargent and Logan like responding with a "God damn it, man," and like the most American possible accent. Like, is Logan Sargent a real person, or did like a European factory like have a marketing meeting and like concoct their version of the most American human possible and just like generate him and pop him into F1? Like, his full name is Logan Hunter Sargent. He is from Florida. He is blonde with blue eyes. Like, he can't be real. He's made up. Not a dig at Logan. I'm sure he's very sweet and very funny. I just like him interacting with Europe is so comical to me. All right, moving on. Q2, there was a brief yellow flag because Carlos ended up in the wall, but he was able to reverse back onto the track. But this did screw up the race for a couple of people, including Alex and George. George's radio was appalling. He goes, "Did we make it?" And they go, "No, we're out." And he goes, "Aw, sugar." Like, not like, "Aw, sugar," like he was about to say shit and then stopped himself. He legit just fully went on to say sugar. Like, how is that like a natural thing that comes out of your mouth when you're swearing? The most George thing to ever happen, honestly. Also crazy, McLaren's both made it into Q3. Oscar is like dying. He's lost half his body weight in like 2 days, and yet he made it into Q3. So well done, Oscar. Q3 itself was relatively uneventful, except for Max setting provisional pole and then Charles getting literally the exact same time. The gap was literally 0.000. And since he did it second, it didn't count. But then there was still some time left, and Charles pulls out a miracle out of his butt, and he sets a 1:40.203 while Max set a 1:43.91. Crazy stuff. And super impressive from Charles. He looks so blissful. Like, he is thrilled about getting pole, and he just like walks around pointing to the Ferrari logo and everything, and like yep, this was them, and then like thanking them, and then like being like, "I'm not going anywhere, Ferrari's for life." And like, bro, you have set the bar so low that any positive thing and you are like, "We're fixed, it's done." It's the bare minimum is giving him a functioning car. Just saying. Anyway, so the starting grid for the race on Sunday is Charles in first, Max, Checo, Carlos, Lewis, Fernando, Lando, Yuki, Lance, Oscar, George, Alex, Valtteri, Logan, Guan Yu, Kevin, Pierre, Nick, and then Esteban and Nico are starting from the pit lane. All right, so now we can finally dig into the most boring race of all time. So the start. At the beginning of the race, one of the commentators said the top 3 are in a league of their own, which is a weird thing to say because Charles is clearly not in the league of the Red Bulls yet. He was able to hold on to the lead for like 3 laps before Max overtakes him, and then Checo overtakes Charles in like lap 5. So basically the trajectory of the race has now shifted towards it being a battle between Max and Checo. And to be fair, Checo was relatively close to Max for the first 10 laps. So it really was a fight between them, and seemingly there would be like no team interference. Like, the team was like, they're fighting, we're staying out of it. And then in lap 10, Nick like nosedives into the wall. And I love his radio conversation. He just goes, "Oh, my left wheel is broken, mate." And then a frantic French voice goes, "Retire the car." Like, exactly what else was he going to do besides retire the car? He literally is wedged deep into the side. Also, Nick on the radio sounds exactly what you would imagine a Dutchman would sound like on the radio if he didn't have anger issues, i.e. Max. He is the Dutchman from Ted Lasso. Just super calm, like, oh, I'm in the wall. Huh, my tire's not working. Huh. Anyway, so that causes a yellow flag, which turns quickly into a safety car, which then triggers a flurry of pit stops, which, by the way, all finished, and the car was still wedged into the wall. So it took like a while to remove, but because of all the pit stops, the order ended up changing a little bit. So by the time the race restarted, the top 10 were Checo, Charles, Max, Carlos, Fernando, George, Lance, Ocon, Nico, and Lewis. Basically, anyone who pitted before the safety car was screwed. Like Lewis, for example, who was like in P5, but because he pitted before the safety car, is now in P10 and has to fight his way back up. Okay, the rest of the race was incredibly boring. I'm going to highlight key teams and their performances instead of doing a play-by-play because the play-by-play would literally be the worst thing imaginable to listen to. We already watched it. First up, I'm going to talk about Red Bull. So Red Bull's race was basically with each other. It became clear again that the team was not going to interfere. However, when the yellow flag came out, Max was immediately called in for a pit stop. He came out in P3 though, and since him and Checo were so close to each other before Max pitted, they couldn't double stack them. So Checo would have to do at least another lap. But then the safety car came out, which gave Checo a free stop and basically relegated Max to P2 because then Charles stopped. And Max was able to get ahead of him, which put Checo in P1, Max in P2. Also, this was kind of weird. I didn't understand this conversation exactly, but the commentators are discussing whether the timing of Max's pit stop was suspect because it was so close to the safety car. They were like, the way they were saying it, it sounded like they're speculating if it's like insider trading or something. Like Red Bull knew there'd be a safety car, so they pulled Max in, but it fucked Max over. And also, what was the benefit otherwise? It seems like a weird thing to discuss or imply, and also pointless. It sounds like they just guessed. There was also nervous chatter about Max being pissed, but Red Bull confirmed that Max saw it as a case of bad timing rather than bad management. And honestly, I don't understand how no one gets Max yet. Like, he's very easy to understand. It's extremely obvious when he's going to get angry, and I didn't think for a second that this would piss him off in any way other than like, gosh darn it. He's like a very reasonable guy, you know, like he's only upset when it's out of his control, or no, sorry, not when it's out of his control, when he feels like he could have done something different or the team could have done something different. That's usually when he gets pissed off. But when it's like a timing issue, he's like pretty fine. All right. Other than that, though, nothing much more happened for Red Bull this race. Max stayed on Checo's heels, but not close enough to like attempt an overtake. And I've seen some people saying that Checo only won because of the safety car timing, but Max literally had like 50 laps to catch up and overtake him. And in my eyes, Checo won completely on merit. Max didn't have the same pace as him. All right, so Ferrari. Okay, so elsewhere, Charles ended up in P3, and he just kind of like stayed in P3. Fernando was hot on his heels, but he never managed an overtake. After the race, though, it was very sad because Charles just described it as the loneliest race ever. And I think he was just sad because I think he got ahead of himself a bit and was like, "Pole, I'm gonna win." And then he got P3, and he's like, "This isn't winning." And I think he just got ahead of himself. But this is progress, and like no fuck ups from Ferrari is progress. So a podium is progress, and you know, there's always time to get that win. He'll have many, many more wins, I know it. In other Ferrari news though, Carlos was having a very tough weekend. The biggest stuff that happened to him during this race was that he got overtaken by Fernando into P4 after the restart, and then Lewis caught up to him. He was in P6, and he spent like the next 20 laps of the race trying and failing to overtake Carlos. So Carlos really did have to, like, he was on it the entire time. But he was clearly sad. At the end of the race, he got on the radio and just apologized for being slow. The Ferrari boys are just sad boys, and it's just horrible. Carlos has literally been sad for like 4 days, and I hope his fortunes change soon too, because it's just sad to watch them. Okay, so Aston Martin. Honestly, this is my favorite duo these days. Obsessed with Fernando. loving Lance out of nowhere. I don't know where this came from, but like I love Lance. Um, and the best part of the race for me from them today was their radios. So the first one came in towards the beginning when Lance got on the radio and said, "Fernando, I will not attack. We are playing the same game." Just giving team orders to himself. Fernando's engineers tell Fernando that Lance said that, and Fernando goes, "Well, he can try." Like, yeah, give it a go. But then he said Lewis is graining, so it's just a matter of time. And this interaction was so entertaining to me. Like, I almost wish I had direct communication over the radio because that would be funny. The next radio moment was later on in the race when Fernando got on and said, "Tell Lance my brake balance suggestion as I am now. I think it could help." Literally like a minute later, though, Lance has a braking issue, which lets Lewis overtake him. And everyone thinks this is hilarious. But my question is, had he already applied Fernando's braking advice or not yet? Because there are basically two scenarios as to why he would do this. Either Fernando doesn't think Lance is a threat, or he was bullshitting and fucked it up on purpose. Or the third suggestion that I think is true is that he was just being nice. I think he was just being nice. Knowing when Lance took his suggestion, whether it was before or after that issue, will really help clear this all up. But I do really think that Fernando was being nice, and they weren't in direct competition in this race, so it was fine to give him advice. He also seems to get along with Lance so much better than Esteban, or like I guess Lance might be more receptive to him. Because I remember at the very beginning, Fernando and Esteban were also kind of brotherly, but that deteriorated super fast. And I feel like it's just because Esteban is not necessarily as easygoing as Lance. I think Lance is super chill and approachable and just like a nice guy. He's just nice. After the race, Fernando was saying that he's only around for a few more years, and that that Lance will be leading the team for a decade after he leaves the sport, and he wants to help him as much as he can. And I really think their friendship is genuine. So my final verdict is that Lance's brake issue was proof that Fernando was right and he needed to adjust his setup rather than the result of intentionally bad advice. Court adjourned. Also, just like as a side note, I think Fernando on the radio is a fascinating study considering how much stuff he's thinking about at all times. Like, I wasn't around towards the beginning, but was this quality something he always had, or was it like honed over the years? Like at the race this weekend, he was driving fast enough to get P4. He was engineering his own race and he was engineering Lance's race. Like, how does his brain work like that? It's insane. Anyway, the final situation I want to talk about, and this is probably the most dramatic thing to happen on Sunday, but basically Esteban and Nico were the last two drivers who hadn't pitted because they both stood a lot to lose. I guess if they pitted, they would lose a lot of places. So they were, I guess, holding out hope for a safety car, but by lap 50 out of 51, I think they were like not coming. So Nico pitted in lap 50. And then everyone started freaking out that Esteban wasn't going to pit because it was literally lap 51 out of 51 and he still hadn't pitted. And if he doesn't pit, he would be disqualified. Because in case you don't know, there's a rule that you have to pit at least once during a race to change tires. I think Alex did it once last year where he literally pitted in the last lap and got like 10th or something. But Esteban pitted and was supposed to pit in lap 51. And first of all, everyone's panicking that he's not going to pit. He forgot or for whatever reason and he'd be disqualified. But then, and this was also stressful because the pit lane was starting to fill up with people. F1 employees were starting to set up for the podium. Photographers were swarming in. The Red Bull engineers were coming out, but I don't know where they were going. They can't climb the fence, so I don't know why they were piling out. And then the Alpine pit crew came out and everyone really started freaking out because they were clearly getting ready for a pit stop and the pit lane was swarmed with people. And then Esteban came in and the view from his dashboard is wild because there's a mob of people in front of him and they were so slow to disperse. It's truly a miracle that he didn't kill anyone. Um, but the commentators, as they were saying all this, sounded simultaneously terrified, but also low-key excited because this was actually the only action that happened today. So why were the people there? In theory, they are allowed to be there. You are allowed to come out in the last lap. But shouldn't someone be regulating them to make sure that no one is in the way in case there are still pit stops to perform? Like, surely there should be like an amendment to the rule that says unless there are still pit stops to complete or something. But really, the rule should just be changed to you can't come out until everyone crosses the checkered flag. Like, there's plenty of time to set up the podium. We get more cooldown room. Like, no one's complaining. You know, like, that is so dangerous. And then it would be Esteban's fault because there were people in his way. Anyway, I think the FIA might want to consider not killing people when they create their rules. Just a thought. So the cool down room and podium was kind of amusing. Charles and Max were in there first, and Charles had sat down in the P1 seat. And when Checo came in, Charles started to stand up and was like, "Oh, do you want your seat?" And Checo's like, "No, no." And then Charles like also giggles and goes, "Let me at least have the seat." And I'm just dead. Charles is like, "If I can't have P1, at least let me have the chair." Poor guy. Also, I love how much Max loves Charles. He is so at ease around him, like almost as much, I think, as around Daniel. Like, he loves Charles. He's his biggest supporter. After qualifying, I forgot to say this, the post-qualifying press conference, he was asked if he was surprised at Charles's pace, and he was like, "No, I'm surprised at Ferrari's pace, but I'm never surprised at Charles's pace because Charles is always going above and beyond and is so great and blah, 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 blah." And it was just very sweet. And also very great distinction. I'm so glad he did that. Anyway, we started to get some debriefing going on, and Charles was telling them how Fernando was coming back at him, and by the end he was only like 6/10 behind him. And in unison, Checo and Charles go, "Really?" Checo also says that it's unfortunate for Max with the pit stop timing, and Max is like, yeah, it is, but it happens. It's okay. It happened to you like last year in Jeddah, which Checo just sort of made like a noise at. He just like made a sound. He was like, "Ugh," or something. So not sure if he appreciated recounting that particular adventure or if he was like agreeing without wanting to discuss it. But like, Max is right, and he clearly wasn't saying it in a mean way. So when all the comments on Max just confuse me all the time, but they were all like, "Max is such a sore loser." Max isn't a sore loser. Max is super calm and chill and happy with everyone. Max is like only upset when he feels that something could have been prevented by either him or the team. If it's out of his control, if he lost by merit, he's never really in that bad of a mood. He was very happy for Max. He was very happy for Checo, and he was very happy for Charles. There in the post-race interview, I don't think this was ever played by anyone. I saw a clip on TikTok, and I wish I could find it again. But he was asked about Checo winning, and he was like, "I'm so happy to have a competitive teammate this year. Checo's trying really hard and doing so well, and it's going to be fun to compete with him." And it was just like a very well-meaning statement that no one ever talks about. He is a good teammate. It's just when he feels like he's been robbed that he gets a little salty. Also, continuing in the chair theme of Charles sitting in Checo's chair, when they went up to the podium, Charles accidentally stood on the second place podium, so the Dutch flag was waving behind him and the Monaco flag was waving behind Max. He's such a space cadet. I love it. Okay, so on to results. The driver of the day was officially Checo, which I guess is deserved. Honestly, everyone was kind of boring today, so it's not like an easy pick. But Checo did deserve it. He won on merit, so that was great. I would also like to give a huge honorable mention to Charles, who not only scored 2 poles in one weekend, he survived a black cat and finished P3. Given the way this year has been going for him, that is huge. Although his mood has definitely dropped as the weekend progressed. After qualifying on Friday, he was like walking on clouds, pointing to the Ferrari logo. Like, there was a clip of him like bouncing up the stairs in the most chipper run ever to hug Fred after qualifying. And I was like, dude, Charles, you have set the bar way too low if you're this excited about receiving the bare minimum from your team. Like, his basic rights include Ferrari giving him a car that works. Literal bare minimum. So he was super happy, but by the end of the race, he was kind of glum again. Like, it seems like he got caught up in the hype of pole, and when he finished P2 in the sprints and P3 in the race, he's like, oh, so I'm not winning races yet. And I guess it hit him that all that's happened is that his car worked and that the strategy wasn't abysmal, so he was able to drive well. So Charles is my driver of the day, and I really hope that the Black Cat Crossing reversed his fortunes and we're about to see a full Charles resurrection because he deserves it. Okay, so my dick in the box is the FIA for letting a bunch of people into the pit lane as Esteban was driving in for his pit stop. Like, it was very 1966, and if you haven't seen the film The Grand Prix, I highly recommend you do. It's about the 1966 year in Formula One, and at that time a lot of not just drivers but also bystanders were dying, and the way they filmed this was by like, it looked like they were using like rag dolls and just like flinging them into like seas and trees to demonstrate people just being murdered by F1 cars. That's the vibe I was getting from Esteban. That was like what was flashing in front of my eyes. So the FIA is my dick in the box. And the second dick in the box, I think, is a joint award to Max and George. Despite who I might agree with, they were both kind of assholes, but in a fun way. I will always support petty drama, so that one's like a happy dick in the box. So the final results are Checo in P1, followed by Max, Charles, Fernando, Carlos, Lewis, Lance, George, Lando, Yuki, Oscar, Alex, Kevin, Pierre, Esteban, Logan, Nico, Valtteri, and Guan Yu and Nick both DNF'd. But yay for Yuki getting points 2 weeks in a row. So the current standings are for the Drivers' Championship, Max with 93 points, Checo with 87 points, only 6 behind Max, Fernando with 60, Lewis with 48, Carlos with 34, and then Charles and George are tied with 28, followed immediately by Lance, who's 1 point behind with 27. And then we have a huge drop down to Lando, who has 10. Nico with 6, Oscar, Valtteri, and Esteban are tied with 4, followed by Guan Yu and Yuki tied with 2, Alex and Kevin with 1, and our 2 rookies, Logan and Nick, have 0. But as F1 loves to say, all is still for play. And in the championship, in the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull leads with 180 points, followed by Aston Martin with 87, then Mercedes at 76, and Ferrari with 62. Then it's like a 40-point drop down to McLaren, followed by Alpine, Haas, Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri, and Williams. Good news, though, is that everyone has at least 1 point. So that's it for the Baku Grand Prix. Next up is Miami in literally a week. Honestly, I know we had this big of a break because of the Chinese Grand Prix being canceled, but it's still annoying to go from like 4 weeks of nothing to like 5 races in 6 weeks. So we're going to be busy bees. But we're heading straight into another race week and we're off to the States. The biggest question, obviously, I have for race week is, will Lewis pop by the Met Gala on the way to Miami? And will the Kardashians be there? Anyways, back to Miami. As Fred Vasseur said, can Miami even be a calm weekend? Some things I think to look forward to is the celebrity clusterfuck that will swarm the paddock and they will have no idea what's going on. But in good news, I believe they're adding some real water to the fake marina. So that is something to look forward to. Anyway, see y'all in a few days. Box.